Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to the IMI Health Hour. We have been discussing the ethical issues related to various aspects of human health. And this is a part of a series of lectures that we are developing, recording, and disseminating through the courtesy of Ahlebait Television for the general introduction of subject and orientation of the problems related to ethical issues throughout the world. It's a part of the project that IMI is conducting to develop a global guidelines on Islamic medical ethics with the help of numerous countries. In the last lecture, we had Professor Rubina Naqvi of SIUT, that is Sindh Institute of Urology and Transplantation from Karachi, Pakistan, who gave a wonderful talk, and I had wonderful feedback from that. But I was told by various people that the material was far too much. So this time we're going to divide into two sessions, and we're going to talk about something which is very relevant in today's world, that is called IVF and in vitro fertilization. So may I welcome Dr. Rubina Naqvi once again from Karachi. Hello Rubina, assalamu alaikum to you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for your kind introduction and giving me once again a chance on this forum of IMI Health Hour.
So let's start.
I'll start with the
This is your introduction.
quote of renowned ethicist from Iran, Dr. Bakr Larijani, who says that it is duty of Muslim ethicists and jurists to analyze modern issues of medicine and biotechnology and inform Muslims about the religious and ethical approaches regarding such issues. So today we will discuss about in vitro fertilization, which is a breakthrough in the treatment of infertility. Next slide, please. Infertility is defined as the inability to achieve a viable pregnancy after 12 months of regular and unprotected sexual intercourse. And according to reports, there is a worldwide 70 million people who are affected with infertility. Among various treatment modalities for infertility, IVF remains the mainstay of treatment, which addresses issues of infertility among both genders simultaneously. Next slide, please. In vitro fertilization consists of collecting ova from the female. First of all, physicians, they give fertility drugs to stimulate the ovaries so that ovarian follicles, they produce numerous ova at a time. Then these ova, through laparoscopic approach or ultrasound guidance, they are aspirated and then they are fertilized in vitro with the spermatozoa. And subsequently, the embryo are cultured in petri dishes up to 3 to 5 days and then transferred to the womb. As the purpose is to give the couple to maximum chances of conceiving, several ovaries are collected and fertilized, resulting in several embryos. And typically, 1 or 2 embryos are transferred at a time, and rest are cryopreserved for future use by the same couple or for some other couple. Next slide, please. Intracytoplasmic sperm injection is the method where single sperm is injected directly into an egg cytoplasm to allow more control over exactly which sperm fertilizes which egg. And the procedure is also carried out in the laboratory, and the fertilized egg is then placed inside the womb using the traditional IVF technique. This procedure is basically used when the quality or quantity of a sperm is low. Next slide, please. First successful baby was born through IVF in July 78. And over last 4 decades, more than 8 million babies are born through this procedure all over the world. Next slide. During these years, the technology has been practiced all over the world, and among Muslim world, the highest rates of assisted reproductive technology being practiced in Iran. And according to a study which was published from the country, that is Iran, in 2011, they have reported that there were 52 infertility centers. And this figure must have been rise over these last years. And the report which was published in 2011 was showing this figure of 35,000 of IVF and ICSI cycles carried out during the year. Next slide, please. With the existence of assisted reproductive technologies, it brings about many ethical concerns. And there arises a question whether reproduction is a fundamental right or it's a luxury. Some would say that when basic health facilities are not available and people are dying with diseases like diarrhea or malaria, then assisted reproductive technology is a luxury. But then the counter argument comes that ART has saved many families and marriages from breakdown. Then with ART, there is the issue of extra embryos. As I said earlier, that many ovaries are fertilized with sperm, and one or two are utilized. Rest, what would be the future of the rest of the embryos? Whether they were destroyed, or they were used for research purposes, or they were used for some other infertile purpose. If they are destroyed, then the question arises that if embryo was already a being, and last week we were discussing the concept of ensoulment. According to Muslims, ensoulment occurs around 120 days, whereas in Christianity they believe that ensoulment, embryo is a being right from the beginning, very beginning, when the egg fertilizes with sperm. So at what stage it's a being? Then what could be the rights of the embryo? And what could be the legal status of the embryo? These are the ethical concerns which are debated world over. Next slide, please. Then if embryos are used for other purpose, whether informed consent was taken from the donors or it was considered, yes, then there is a concern that if these embryos are used for other couples, then whether informed consent has been taken from the donors, or there is a point of keeping anonymity, whether anonymity would be kept for the donors. If anonymity is kept and sustained, then what effect on offspring when offspring comes to know in later life about origin of self and want to find out roots? And what if couple divorce, who will own the frozen embryo? This was a very famous case of Yvonne Nadal, who lost her case after 4 years of legal battle because the couple got divorced, and then there was a case that who will own the frozen embryo. Then there is a concern about, and there is a much lengthy debate about that embryos are commodities when they are used from other couples, and if they are paying to donors. Another point is that physicians are playing the role of God by making some creations. But one would say that at one end, if people feel that this technology allows couple to manipulate nature, then at the other hand, people will believe that this technology is an achievement of man's creativity and which can be used to overcome nature's constraints. Next slide, please. Then another principle of ethics which addresses the respect for autonomy. So if a woman requests implantation of 7 embryos, so whether physician would be paying respect to autonomy in such cases, because last time we have discussed about the complications associated with multiple pregnancies. So another issue is if HIV positive women or couple, they ask for assisted reproductive technology, should they be provided with the technique, facilities? Next slide. Coming to the legal status of in vitro fertilization or assisted reproductive technology, some of the countries, they have laid down proper law and they have legal support for infertility treatment, while other countries, they just have some official guidelines addressing these issues. Iran, which has highest rates of assisted reproductive technologies among Muslim countries, they have approved this law by their parliament. So it's legalized in Iran. Next slide. Now talking about the different religions, what they say about IVF. Next slide. First, I will talk about this ancient religion of Buddhism. They are very liberal in ART and they allow use of IVF to married couples. And sperm donation is also permitted in Buddhism. They also have shown this concern that a child born from donated gametes has right to meet the genetic parents according to tradition. Next slide. Hinduism, which is also an ancient religion, and they agree with most of ARTs, and they also accept sperm donation. But traditionally, they favor sperm from relatives of infertile husbands. And recently, abortion has also been legalized, and adoption of child also practiced in Hindu community. Next slide. Judaism, as I said previously, that this is a pronatal religion, and in the Torah, people are instructed to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. The three main sects of Jews, Orthodox, Conservatives, and Reforms, although they all believe in 10 commandments, but they differ in their acceptance of various forms of in vitro fertilization. In general, if one has been diagnosed with infertility and IVF is mandatory, it's allowed, as Jews has an obligation to be fruitful and multiply. And Israel, who is a Jew country, they support 6 sessions of in vitro fertilization, treatment funded by a state, or up to 2 successful childbirths through these techniques. Next slide, please. Christianity, the Catholic Church in 1956, they said that artificial techniques are immoral and illegal because it separates procreation and normal sexual contact. And these views were reinforced in 1968 and again in 1987. And a document entitled Respect of Human Life and the Dignity of Procreation stated that children are a gift and a blessing of God, and that although the science makes some things possible, it doesn't make them right. So all forms of assisted reproduction are not accepted in Christianity, according to Catholic Church. Intrauterine insemination can be accepted if the semen is collected by sexual intercourse, while artificial insemination from donor is forbidden because it involves a third party. Next slide. In Protestants, they vary in their beliefs on IVF, and there is not one set of ethical guidelines for these couples to follow regarding its use. Those who support IVF, they limit its use to married couples. And some Protestants, they favor adoption as alternative for IVF. Next slide, please. Coming to Islam, according to Sunni concepts, as we know that they have two main sources for getting degree or fatwa. One is Al-Azhar University of Cairo, Egypt, and other is Islamic Fiqh Council of Makkah, Saudi Arabia. And then there are two sources for the guidelines. One is the Organization of Coes, and other is Morocco. And all of these four sources, they have issued their decree on IVF. And according to this guidelines or decree, they say that IVF is allowed as long as sperm and ovum are from married couple while they are still in marriage. They also allow cryopreservation of embryo, and it can be used by the same woman if marriage is still valid. In case if divorce has occurred or husband has died, then it would be void. Research on embryo younger than 120 days is permissible. However, a meeting in the Bath in 2002 suggested limiting this research to 14 days. Next slide. According to Shia Islam, decree from Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, he said that IVF is allowed if sperm and eggs collected from husband and wife. With donor sperm, it was not allowed according to him, but it can be ignored if happens unknowingly. Next slide. Ayatollah Ali al-Khamenei said that IVF is allowed for infertile couples where treating physician has confirmed the case of infertility. It's been allowed with donor sperm or egg where it is required. Stored eggs or sperm usage is also allowed, only that the lineage will be marked with sperm donor. He is also allowed for destruction of excess frozen embryos. Next slide. According to Ayatollah Ali Sistani, IVF is allowed with sperm and ova provided by married couple. Sperm from donor other than husband is not allowed according to him, whether the husband of recipient woman gives consent or not. And if female gets pregnant with sperm other than her husband, if it was accidental, then there is no penalty. And child born will be offspring of person whose sperm was. So all lineage, even heirship belongs to him. And this is not considered adultery, though process was forbidden. Next slide. And now coming to the next topic of gamete donation or sperm donation or egg donation or embryo donation. Next slide. The first recorded experiment with artificial insemination in humans was occurred in 1700, so more than 2 centuries, where a Scotch surgeon impregnated a woman with her husband's sperm. Then in 1884, it was artificial insemination with the donor sperm, which occurred. Next slide. Then the use of donated embryos for purpose of establishing a family is a successful therapeutic option for some infertile couples. As I said earlier, that embryo cryopreservation is an unavoidable part of artificial reproductive techniques, IVF, which normally is for future usage, and mostly by the owner couple and sometimes for the some other recipients. Next slide. The law for gamete or egg or sperm donation, it guarantees anonymity in the UK. It was anonymity in the Greek, but UK is no longer following the anonymity. Countries that do not accept commercial donations, such as the UK, compensation for the donor's time, participation in lab tests and procedures suffering from surgery and anesthesia can be acceptable. Next slide. In Iran, although there is no stated law for egg donation, but there is a law for embryo donation. Although all infertility clinics, they are practicing egg donation as well, but embryo donation is supported by law. And common practice is to use the residual excess embryos from IVF treatment of infertile couples to donate other infertile applicants. And all those who has confirmed infertility by their treating physicians, they can apply. But a single woman or widows cannot apply for the embryo. And all parental rights, duties and responsibilities for the child support as child has from the biological parents would be similar for the child who born through IVF. Next slide. Iranian law does not permit any payment for embryo donation, though compensation for egg donation is allowed. And then some would say that when the word donation is used, then there should be no payment. Next slide. Ethical issues concerned with the egg donation or sperm donation, mainly with the money involvement with gamete or embryo donation, there arises the concept of commodification, as there is no more altruism here. Then the rights of donor of springs, how far they can go to seek their identity if anonymity is kept there. So, and how far keeping the anonymity is possible. Self-identity is important. Everyone wants to know the roots. The gamete donation may lead to conflict of interest between the donor, the recipient, and even the prospective child, particularly in terms of anonymity, and the information that is made available about the specific circumstances of donation. Next slide. According to utilitarian view, they would favor to give a maximum benefits to donors so that they can increase the number of donors and maximize the availability of the practice. Then informed consent is also an issue for donation. So the donor's autonomy should be respected. Next slide. In situation where recipient couple desire for fresh embryo or other frozen embryo, should physician be paying respect to their anonymity, or they do justice with the donor? Because for collecting the fresh embryos, one has to give a stimulation for stimulating hormones to the female to produce more ova, which sometimes can give rise to hyperstimulation syndrome and adverse effects. And studies have proven that frozen embryos can be as good as the fresh embryo. So, in the cases where they ask for fresh embryo, should physician be giving respect to their autonomy? And this is a concern. Then the voluntariness of the oocyte donor is also a concern. Next slide. Then some would say that should the gamete donation be comparable to other form of biomaterials such as blood or bone marrow or organs like kidney donation, which are usually unpaid? Is the ability to create a child is worth more than providing an organ like kidney to a stranger? Although gamete donation is not as invasive as donation of an organ, but it is essentially the removal of part of oneself. One is sharing his or her genes. Next slide. Then there is the sanctity of the family's genetic lineage. Especially in cases of anonymity, how one can trace the genetic lineage. Then there are risks of distinctions for genetic pedigree. Then there are one donor is providing many sperms, and they have been used for many couples, so there are chances of unintentional future incest, because the offspring or children, they may get married along with it. They are actually half siblings, getting the sperm from the same donor father. Then, if it was interest of the child to be born, or when he becomes an adult, he can question it that why I was brought in existence actually if you were infertile. So this is also a concern. Then resource allocation, how should the distribution be made to available couples providing the embryo or ova or sperm? How one can make justice among these supply and demand base. Then there is also a concern that what should be done with the embryo if a donor is already dead. So their cryopreserved gametes can be used or not. Next slide. So as we know that in Muslim world, maximum ART has been practiced in Iran. So in Iran, the donor egg and donor embryo program has been set up at most infertility clinics. And the donor egg sources are mainly from the other IVF patients, their cryopreserved embryo, or the relatives, they come forward, they donate for their infertile relatives. Or the third source is getting temporary marriage, which is called Muta'a. Muta'a is a contact marriage where duration is defined and women will get marriage money, the meher. And after finishing the defined duration, the marriage will dissolve spontaneously. Muta'a is something which is legitimate in only Shia Islam. Next slide. So we try to find out its origin from Quran, which is the main source of law in Islam. So Surah Al-Nisa, which is fourth surah in Quran, and it's ayah number 24, it mentions Muta'a. And it says that, and with the woman you have brought in through Muta'a, you must pay meher according to contract. And this surah Al-Nisa is a Madani surah, and this verse then never cancelled later on in Quran. Next slide. Then Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari, who was a companion of Prophet, he stated that we practiced Muta'a during the time of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and during times of first caliph. Till the second caliph withdrawn this opportunity and forbidden it. This was taken from Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal, volume 3, which was published from Egypt. And I have taken this from this book, Yaqeen Mahkam, by Sheikh Muhammad Ali Patialvi, and it was published from Mahfuz Book Agency here in Pakistan. Next slide, please. According to Ayatollah Khamenei, he says that he clearly specifies that Muta'a is not required to get embryo preparation, because he says that the adultery requires the physical act of intercourse. So getting donor sperm or ova is not considered as adultery. So the temporary marriage, even temporary marriage is not required for the procedure. Next slide. Coming to the religious views regarding sperm or ova donation. In Judaism, their halakhic law is the document where male rabbi legislate on the appropriate uses of IVF for their followers. Third-party donation of gametes, including sperm donation, is allowed since Jewishness is seen to be transferred through the mother's side, particularly through the act of carrying in utero and giving birth to the baby. However, most conservative rabbis prefer that non-Jewish donor sperm be used so that future incest can be prevented. And the rabbis have even allowed single women as well as lesbian Jewish mothers conceiving children through artificial reproductive techniques. Next slide. In Christianity, The relevant biblical passages are first Genesis, which introduces the concept of one flesh. God designed marriage to be a union of a man and a woman to become one flesh. Though Christians should feel compassion for infertile couples, third-party reproductive arrangements are unwise at best. Next slide. In Sunni Islam, these fatwa are taken from the famous Hanafi school that they won from Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani. And his fatwa has been compiled one of his companions, Maulana Muhammad Zubair ul-Haq. And they have specified each and every situation, like sperm of husband, ovum from a woman, and uterus of wife is not allowed. Sperm and ovum both from third party not allowed. Sperm from other man, ovum of wife and uterus of wife is not allowed. They have only given permission for use of sperm of husband, ovum of wife, fertilized outside and implanted in the uterus of the wife. Like IVF in a couple with where marriage is already in existence. That is the only condition where the IVF is allowed. Next slide. Among Shia Muslims, the practice of ijtihad has allowed certain flexibility and pragmatism towards new technological developments in field of medicine. Next slide. According to some of the Grand Ayatollah, they have allowed gamete donation in all its different cases. And they have reasoned it because they said that there is no specific hadith or law prohibiting this practice. Next slide. According to Ayatollah Ali Sistani, he says that IVF with donor sperm, though not allowed, but if it happens, it is not similar to adultery. And child born will get lineage and heirship from a sperm donor, and motherhood will not be different from other children. Next slide. But some of the mujtahideen, they have forbidden the gamete donation, even in cases where it is crucial. Next slide. Some of mujtahideen like Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, Grand Ayatollah Khoi, and Muntaziri Gulpaigani, Makarim Shirazi, they have given permission for gamete donation to sperm and ovum of husband and wife, but they have disallowed from donated sperm. Next slide. So, coming to our next topic, which is surrogacy or the gestational career. And there is a slight difference between these two. Surrogacy is, next slide please. Surrogacy is defined as a woman who agrees to carry pregnancy using her own ova, but the sperm of another couple, and hand over the child to this couple upon birth. Whereas the gestational carrier is a woman who permits implantation of embryo. That means that both the sperm and ova are from other people. So this woman carries in her utero, and after pregnancy finishes, they hand over the child to this couple. And currently, the use of gestational carrier is more common than that of surrogate, because in surrogacy, their ova belongs to the woman who carries in utero. Next slide. Commercial surrogacy is not permitted in many countries, but it's completely legal in India. Surrogacy is legal in Israel, but it's only for heterosexual couples. Gay couples, they choose overseas surrogacy options to fulfill their desire of having a child. Next slide. The main ethical concerns associated with surrogacy are, central one is the use of surrogates and gestational carriers is the possibility that financial pressures could lead to exploitation and commodification of the service. And only poor women will be providing the surrogacy or gestational carrier. Next slide, please. Some have shown concern about the use of surrogates and gestational carriers and label it as a form of child selling or the sale of the parental rights. Next slide. Single women or gay couples or lesbian couples, if they were asking for surrogacy, it raises a major concern. And because in lesbian couples, both women, they could conceive naturally. Problem is that their sexual preference is different. There is not a biological problem. So IVF cannot be offered even if they can afford. That is the main argument which people bring about. Then with surrogacy, the reproductive tourism is also a major concern. Next slide, please. Surrogate services are advertised, surrogates are recruited, the operating agencies, they make large profits out of this advertisement and this business. The commercialism of surrogacy raises fears of a black market and baby selling, of breeding the sperm, turning impoverished women into baby producers, and the possibility of selective breeding at a price. Surrogacy degrades pregnancy to a service and baby to a product. So it becomes commodity. Next slide. Religious views regarding surrogacy. In next slide, please. In Judaism, surrogacy is debatable, and most rabbis, they do not accept it. However, those who allow it, they make sure that the single Jewish woman would be getting surrogacy. It is because of the reason to avoid the adultery for married surrogate women and to grant Judaism through a Jewish woman's gestation. Next slide, please. In Christianity, Roman Catholic Church followers cannot go for surrogacy because it's not allowed. Then Church of England has shown concern about offering fertility treatment to single women or gay couples. The Eastern Orthodox Church is also not accepted surrogacy. The most lenient church, the Coptic Orthodox, is also not in favor of surrogacy. Next slide. In Islam, in Sunni scholars, most of them have not accepted surrogacy. Yeah, but in Fiqh Council of Makkah in '84 allowed in cases where two wives of a person, ovum of one and uterus of other is used as surrogate, can be accepted. However, this fatwa was reversed when second marriages and divorce become frequent, and it was made for just for the purpose of getting insight. Next slide. According to Deoband school, surrogacy is strictly forbidden if one borrowed child's father would be who's one of his companion, Maulana Abdul Wahid, shows some relaxation, like he just discussed the case. He said that if whom his borrowed child's father would be whose sperm was, and both women, one who belongs to ova and other who kept in womb, both will be considered as mothers. Next slide. In Shia Islam, according to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, surrogacy is allowed among two wives of same person or for other couples' embryo. So it's been allowed for all cases. Next slide. According to Ayatollah Sistani, surrogacy and gestational carriage are allowed, and if woman transfers her husband's sperm to uterus of other woman, the child born will get fatherhood from person whose sperm was, and motherhood from woman who is carried out in utero and given birth to the child. If sperm in ova of married couple implanted in uterus of third woman, child would get lineage and heirship from sperm and ova contributors. If one of them dies while child was still in utero, then heirship will be waived. I think it was all for today.
Thank you, Rubina. That is a massive amount of material that you have given us. What I will do is I'll probably split it into two lectures because it's a lot of material for a mortal mind like me to absorb in one session, but it's massive. Now, there are several questions that crop up, and I will just pose one or two. There is this question of the spare embryos. Now, if the embryo is alive, should it be allowed to perish, or sometimes they kill the embryos, or should be preserved, like you said, through the cryo preparations for future use? That is an ethical debate. Now, what is the current policy, for example, in Iran? Are these embryos allowed to perish in the petri dish, or they're frozen for future use?
They keep it cryopreserved. They freeze the residual embryo, and if they are not used by the same couple, they will use it for other couples who come for infertility treatment.
Right.
And there are at different places the practices differ. At some places they keep frozen embryos for like 5 years, and then the couple who is keeping the frozen embryos, they have to pay on annual basis. So after 5 years, they will destroy unused if the couple is not allowed to use for other couples. Right. So they are destroyed.
Now,
but in Iran, because they have many infertility clinics and ART has been practiced more widely, so and they are using for other couples as well. So they are not destroying the embryos,
Right.
and they are mostly using these frozen embryos, and some they are using for research purposes.
Now that is where my question comes up. So what, I mean, who has the right to allow this embryo to be engaged in research? The parents, like the mother or the donor, or who? Who has the question of the ownership of the embryo crops up as an ethical debate.
Yeah, they say that when they collect ova, that's why they pay to the egg donors. As I said in my presentation, that they do not pay to the embryo donors, but they pay to egg donors. So because eggs are collected by by stimulating the ovary.
Right, right.
So there are risks and chances of getting hyper stimulation syndrome, and this is quite morbid condition for women. So they pay these women who sell their eggs.
Right.
So when they pay them, they take their consent that either these eggs will be used for embryo to be used for infertile couples, or embryo to be used for research purposes.
Right.
So,
now we are running out of time, but I think I'll carry on this debate for another 5 to 10 minutes so that we can divide this into 2 sessions. The second very important question is that of Muta'a, which again, as you mentioned, it is from the Quranic ayat that you've given the reference from Surah Nisa, and you also mentioned it was practiced by Prophet's companions. You mentioned a couple of names there. What is the current situation of Muta'a in the Islamic world?
Muta'a is only practiced in Iran these days, and all other Muslim countries, they do not accept this concept of Muta'a. They are with the verdict that it has been cancelled and it's forbidden now. So there is no such thing like temporary marriage. But Shia Islam or Iran, they stand with the Quranic verse and the Hadith, and saying that when Prophet has not cancelled it, and neither any Quranic verse cancelled this ayah later on, so it should not be cancelled then.
So in one of these, during the literature search, I came across a paper which you've also mentioned by In Horn, very good writer.
Yes.
And she mentioned about it that the reason why Muta'a was allowed, and there are a lot of clinics that came up in Lebanon because of that reason, because they were using different fatwa, that temporary marriage will save the marriage of the original couple. Through Muta'a, one could have the gamete transfer, the gamete could be obtained, and that Muta'a could then be cancelled because of temporary arrangement. And that was the reason a lot of people used this verdict of fatwa in Lebanon. I'm told a lot of people went there, a lot of women went there, even from the non-Shia communities. Is that true?
Yes. My knowledge is also limited to the literature search, and this paper you are mentioning, I have also found it there in this paper, that many people, they are traveling to Lebanon, and Lebanese physicians, they are using this fatwa from Iran.
So that becomes commercialization.
So, even the Sunni Muslims, they are going there.
Yes.
The infertile Sunni couples, they are going there for treatment.
That is what I've read also. The question is that then it becomes a commercial activity, and that would be unethical.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So I've got 5 more minutes because then we'll finish off. I'm going to talk briefly about the concept of surrogacy. In one of the, you mentioned about two things, surrogacy and what's the other one? Gestational?
Gestational carrier.
Okay. Now, in one of the debates somewhere else many years ago, this question came up and some very learned scholar raised this question to me. I was giving a talk and this was a famous gynecologist was talking about surrogacy. The question came up about Hazrat Ibrahim and Hajar and Sarah. Was that a kind of surrogacy, an arrangement of surrogacy or gestational transfer or what?
This was because Hajar's ovum, it was surrogacy because it was her own ovum.
Okay. Yes, and so it was surrogacy of kind, was it? Was it surrogacy because Hajra and Sarah. Sarah was the original wife of Ibrahim, Hazrat Ibrahim.
Because Sarah was elderly and
Yes.
she said herself that
Right.
I'm old woman and I'm bound.
Yeah,
So
yes.
how can I?
Right,
So
we'll not,
probably the ovum
we'll not discuss it further.
belongs
It's a very sensitive issue. I will drop it. I will not go on to. But what is
Yeah,
the current
yeah.
situation of? Yeah, it's very sensitive. But this debate came up many years ago, and I was very reluctant to carry on, so I withdrew. So my question is that what is the situation of surrogacy in Islam at the moment? You mentioned about various fatwa like Sunni. In Iran, surrogacy is allowed?
Yes, that is.
Okay. Now finally, in one of the debates that I was having...
In Saudi Arabia and in Turkey, it's not allowed.
Okay, fair enough. Now the other alternative for surrogate, not exactly alternative, it's not biological, but in one of the debates where we had some learned scholars sitting with me and I was only a humble student, the question came up that what could be, if somebody wants to have a child and surrogacy is not allowed, could adoption be an alternative? And obviously adoption is strongly recommended in Islam, strongly recommended. The only problem is that adoption means the biological heritage, the question of nasab that you mentioned, and the heritage in terms of financial rewards and wealth. What is the situation there? Adoption will not, you cannot take the name away because the name, and the famous example is that of Hazrat Ali, who adopted Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, who was always called Muhammad bin Abi Bakr because the name
Yes.
of the father continues. What is the situation of nasab and wealth? I mean, how's the inheritance transferred to an adopted child? Would the child be allowed to have inheritance or not?
Adoption is allowed, but inheritance will go with his genetic father.
With the biological father.
Yes.
Very delicate issues. These I've had these
Yes, yes.
I've had these debates with learned scholars, and there are many dilemmas, there are grey zones which need to be explored. And I think it's a great opportunity with lectures like this, for example, if the forum is open and people can come forward and give their ideas. But of course, we take the guidance in our fiqh, we take from our maraji. And we have very clear mandate that our maraji are the scholars, that the learned people, we learn from them. If we have any problems, we go back to them and seek advice. But I think in the last lecture you mentioned that there is a little problem in Sunni Islam because they don't have that concept of a learned, like there's no concept of marjiyat or taqlid.
Yes.
So do they go to Jam al-Azhar, like you mentioned, or to other places for getting verdict? And if somebody doesn't reach consensus, then what do you do?
They just take fatwa from Al-Azhar or Makkah, Saudi Arabia, two sources for fatwa and two sources for guidelines.
Right.
One is in Kuwait and another is Morocco.
Right. I think what is needed very badly is that once we develop this encyclopedia of Islamic medical ethics, we need to discuss with our brothers in Islam and try to reach a consensus. because, of course, Islam gives a clear mandate in Quran, and we follow Quran, Ahlebait, and Hadith from Ahlebait. And of course, there are certain differences between understanding and things, but we need to have a consensus about these complex issues. Many times the question is asked where we cannot give the answer because we are not experts. We only, basically, doctors are physicians or let's say technicians. The knowledge as far as fiqh and ilm is concerned, that's with our maraji, scholars, and that is the reason I'm a strong believer that we should have, and we must, and I do, I'm sure others also do, and you do too, to have taqleed. Taqleed gives us the guidance.
Yes.
Because if we're stuck, we go back to our maraji and we seek the advice and the scholars, and they're advised by other scholars. The people who advise in particular fields like financial matters, they have scholars who will advise them. Legal matters, they have experts who come in. Medical matters, experts from all over the world will come and advise them. So it's with the help of the advisors they come to decisions. So we're blessed with that kind of approach, I think.
Yes.
Thank you, Rubina. I'm so grateful to you for these wonderful talks. We'll have continuation, and I look forward to your next talk on reproductive health, followed by maybe a talk or two about the organ donation. But you're working in an institute which has pioneered the ethical principles of organ donation. SIUT has done amazing work, and I think at some stage we'll need to discuss it. Thank you, and I'd say Khuda Hafiz.